All right. So, hello, lovely people. It is so lovely on this Monday, whether or not it's your favorite day of the week. It's just lovely to be here and have our very special guest here to talk about a very important topic. And so, before we get kicked off, I did just want to run through some quick housekeeping things. As you'll see, we're not on Zoom as we previously are used to. We're now running on Bevy. And so with that, just a couple housekeeping notes. Please like your favorite questions in the Q&A section, and please feel free to either drop your questions or comments in the Q&A section so that we can ask Sienna those questions. This is being recorded, and so we'll send an email afterwards with a rewatch. So, don't worry about taking a bunch of notes. Of course you can, but you don't have to. You can always come back and take some notes afterwards. If you want to ask a question privately, please feel free to DM myself, and I will ask those anonymously to Sienna. Try to avoid DMing Sienna if you want to ask a question, because it's also like a little bit hard to, do both things at the same time. And then, so wrapping up here, you can drop your questions in the Q&A section, drop your comments in the chat box. Please drop a +1 in the chat box if you want to come off of mute, because I know, on Bevy, you don't have the ability to do it automatically, but I'm happy to do so for you. And then again, if you do decide that you want to come off of mute and turn on your camera, you will show up in the recording. And so I'm really excited to introduce today's speaker after all of that housekeeping. We have Sienna J Brown on the line. Sienna J Brown is a senior manager of global DEI strategy here at Power to Fly, where she focuses on long-term impact and innovation. Her mission is to help build inclusive companies and communities so that underrepresented talent can thrive. Over the past 6 years, her focus has been working with companies and employees to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace that has an positive impact on their personal and professional lives. She's the founder of Master Your Move Abroad, where she teaches women of color how to find the clarity, career, and community they need to build a life abroad. And when she's not working, she's at home on the Mediterranean coast, watering her plants, cooking a good meal, or free diving. Okay, all of those sound amazing. And so, Sienna, I wanted to pass the mic to you quickly so that you can tell us, anything that's missing here, why this topic is important to you today, and anything, that I missed in that introduction.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this was a fantastic introduction. So thank you, Nicole. I love being in conversation with you. And no, this pretty much covers it all. But I know that the conversation around like choosing your next career move as a Black professional is something that's super important to me. So like I mentioned, I'm the founder of Master Your Move Abroad. I see a lot of my students here, so I'm excited that y'all are showing up. I'm also seeing a lot of new individuals. And I think that this is something that is just so important of being able to say, how do we learn how to tackle limiting beliefs that we have about what's actually possible for us, be able to figure out how to be able to make a career move and career shift when you might have been in a specific field for a long amount of time, and then really just learning how to embody our best selves and like show up at work authentically and not feel afraid to shrink ourselves or to be someone that we're not in order to fit into a new career move, but instead like aligning our professional opportunities with our personal aspirations and with who we are so that we can be our best selves no matter where we're at. So really quickly before we do dive into it, definitely again, just recapping what Nicole said, send your questions if you have them in the moment and drop them in Q&A. Ginny B, I saw that you've already done that, and we'll be sure to kind of like answer what y'all want to hear as we're going through, in addition to the other questions that we got in. So I'm excited.
Perfect. And so lastly, just want to, talk about the principal themes for today's conversation, which we're going to answer through these questions. So mindset shifts to re-envision what's possible for you in the workplace, strategies to position your past experience with clarity and confidence, and skills to know your worth and negotiate for what you deserve. And so, before we also kick off here, I did just want to say, I want to just be a part of this conversation in the background, really want to take the, give obviously the space for Sienna and all of you to share your voice. So, with that said, I'm also going to turn off my video because I want to give all of you the opportunity to be able to share your voice and everything else. And so I'll read the question. I'll turn off my video. I won't, be in the whole background because that would be kind of weird. But so just wanted to shout that out. And then, so I'm going to kick us off here with, I think, this general question for you, Sienna, which is, how do you know when it's the right time to leave a company?
Yeah, this is great. And also this is going to be really interesting because I can't see myself, so I'm not going to be able to see, like, if y'all can see me, okay. So if I'm not, just drop it in the chat. But this is a really great question. So the question is, how do you know when it's the right time? How do we realize when there's no more room for growth? And so this is something that's really interesting, and actually what happened to me last year during the start of a pandemic, during the start of the pandemic, not a pandemic, the pandemic. And having been at a company here in Spain for the past 3 years, and I loved my work. It was really fun, and it was great because it gave me the lifestyle that I wanted. But something that I had to realize, there were two different things that happened, right? One is actually intentionally giving yourself space to not be doing the work on a day-to-day basis, to not be so involved in it or so engaged, where you're able to step back and reflect on, like, what do I want for the next chapter of my life? And I think that this is so important because it was something that I didn't realize, ironically enough, like when we were in lockdown, the job that I was doing before, I was doing business development as well as press, marketing, and just like overall strategy for a co-living space. And I had loved it. But a big part of that was I was also there as a host. And during the pandemic, it was the first time in, I think, 3 years where I didn't have to actively worry about taking care of other people or making sure that other people were okay. And it was so eye-opening for me because I realized, like, oh, I don't really think I want to be doing this anymore. And again, this is something where it's always so typical to be like, oh, well, things are going okay. I'm getting paid well. Like, things are fine. Why would I change? And sometimes it's really about giving yourself space to not be in it and actually reflect on what is it that you want for the next chapter of your life. And I say this because, again, it's really easy for us to work and live comfort zones, right? It's really easy for us to be able to say, okay, but things are going well. But instead of actually asking ourselves, like, do we feel like we're being fully fulfilled, right? And something that I had to ask myself is that, do I feel like I'm actually growing professionally with where I'm learning from other people? And this is something that's really important because a lot of the times if you want to be growing and thinking about your career more long term, it's about asking yourself, like, I always say, like, I don't want to be the smartest person in the room, right? And I think that it's really important to be able to say, like, okay, well, if you feel like you are giving and giving and you're the smartest person in the room and you don't necessarily have space or room to grow, it's time to ask yourself, like, okay, do I need to transition to a place where I feel like I might be able to have more impact? Do I need to transition to a place where I feel like I have the resources and support behind me to be able to constantly be learning and evolving? And again, my recommendation would be, I know sometimes people feel like, oh, well, I don't want to take PTO, or if I do, it's because I want to be on vacation or just like living it up, which is great. But asking yourself, like, take a think week or take a think long weekend, right? And like sit and reflect on what is the vision that you have for your life moving forward. And if the job or company that you're in right now is aligned with that, right? And looking at your life in a holistic way. So not just personal and professional life, because that's so vague, but really being able to say, am I growing? Am I feeling fulfilled? Am I having impact? Am I making the income that I want to be making? And asking yourself some of those harder questions, but not when you're taking time off, but you're still kind of reactively doing things in your work, but really stepping back and giving yourself enough time to reflect on that and be able to say, like, oh, hold on, is this what I really want? Okay. So really quickly, I'm seeing in the chat, can everyone see and hear me okay? I noticed that Yvonne couldn't, so just give me a quick heads up if y'all can. Yes? Okay, fantastic. And yeah, so for me, that's the biggest thing. So it's the right time to leave a company. That's one thing that you can do. And another part of that is a good way to know if you can leave the company is like if you don't feel valued there anymore. And that's a huge thing because a lot of the times you can be here putting in the work, taking actions, and you feel like you're working in a silo or that the work that you're doing isn't valued, then that's a good moment for you to be able to say, like, oh, hold on. Could I be taking my skills, my expertise, my experience, my personality, my dopeness, right, to another place where I am feeling seen and valued, where there are and that's it. Also, Nicole, I was like, I would love for you to come back. And I was like, you could be a part of the conversation if you want to. Also, I can't see myself, but I want to be able to create that space because I know sometimes having that conversation definitely helps.
Sorry about that, Sienna. I just wanted to make sure that I'm not taking up, space that is not designated for me in this conversation. And so I just want to be conscious of that. But I'm happy to be here if you invite me to be in your space. But I think it's really important what you're saying, because I think a lot of times when we think about our next career move, sometimes there's things that make sense and sometimes there's things that don't make sense, right? Especially when we're looking from the outside. Maybe you have people in your family who are like, that's really crazy. Why would you leave when you work for XYZ company, or it seems that this is all set up for you? But I think you talked about something, prefacing into this when after your introduction, which was also about being authentic, right? And I would love for you to talk about that a little bit and how that plays into that. And then I have a question after that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that Nicole just mentioned, also quick shout out to Nicole because she's an ally that I know in all honesty. So I appreciate that and I respect that. And in regards to the question that you just asked or what you had just mentioned, I want to talk about something because specifically, I mean, we're here to talk about choosing your next career as a Black professional. I'll be real honest with y'all. Like, that's something that happens a lot in the Black community of being able to say, but like, oh, but I'm doing better than my mom might have, or I'm doing better than my grandma might have. Like, I should be grateful. I shouldn't want more. Like, I'm already doing okay compared to society standards. And like, that's something where, in all honesty, that'll block you from doing more because you feel like you're being ungrateful or you feel like, oh, well, I already have enough. Why would I want more? But what that's really doing is like hindering yourself from being able to set it up for the next generation. So like they don't have to have those same problems or issues of being able to say like, okay, life is good now, but how can I break through society standards of like what they think is good or aligned or okay with me versus like being able to challenge that. And it's funny because I'm a part of an online community by Rachel Rogers that's called We Should All Be Millionaires. And so for her specifically, that's focused on like how can we empower women of color, women in the LGBTQI plus community, et cetera, to like redefine what we think is possible for Black women and like position ourselves to do that. But it's so funny because we think about that and it's like, oof, we have all of these blocks or these emotional blocks of being like, oh, well, I wouldn't want to be a millionaire because millionaires are X, Y, and Z, instead of saying, hold on, when we have more access to finances and resources and economic empowerment, that doesn't just mean that like you have money to have money. It means that you now will have more time, you will have more energy, you'll be able to create more space and impact for other people out there. And there'll be more of a representation of like what's actually possible. And Nicole, it's interesting because I'm going to go on a lot of tangents, but it's fine. But it's interesting because during the pandemic, actually before I joined Power to Fly, I had decided that I didn't want to go back to my job. We were currently like on leave. And I had gotten a job offer that was paying me twice as much as what I was making before. But it was something that I didn't feel excited about. And like, I thought about it and I was like, I don't want to, this is the way that my mind works, but I was like, it was a job that was only in the afternoons but it was doing something that was like very like admin tasks, etc. And I asked myself, I'm like, would I be annoyed at myself if I couldn't go spend time with friends because I was doing work that wasn't aligned with my bigger purpose? And I turned down the job. And that was something where a lot of my friends were like, you're crazy. Why would you do that? Like the world's at a standstill. You just got offered a job without applying, etc. But I stood strong with that and being able to say like, I want to be doing work that allows for me to live a life that I love. Come to find out, I joined Power to Fly, like I think 2 to 3 months later, and it was the best thing ever. Obviously, that's why we're here. But having to say no to those things sometimes be doing instead of trusting your instinct and being able to say, hold on, is this really what's right for me and the change that I want to be able to make in the world? Or is this something that I'm just doing to like put a Band-Aid on a bigger issue, you know? So Nicole, I didn't answer the question that you had originally asked. I was commenting on something that you had said, but can you ask me the original question or the original second question that you had asked again?
I mean, I think you did a good job because I think you got to the point of being, thinking about your purpose and what you want to do and like turning down those bigger things. And so the question that I wanted to get to there as well was, what are some good affirmations to shift your mindset while seeking out your next job? But also on that line of like looking at your purpose, I feel like this pandemic, this whole situation has really thrown people through a loop, right? Because it's like, I don't know what I want to do anymore. Like, I don't know what I like. What I thought I did like, maybe it is what I was doing. And now I don't like what I'm doing. So, do you have any
Yeah.
tips as well for like, these good affirmations to shift your mindset while looking for your next job, but also figuring out what that next job looks like for you?
Mhm. I love this. Okay, so absolutely. Thank you for reframing the question. Talking about how to figure out what the next right shift is, I think something that's more important about instead of asking yourself what you want, asking yourself what you don't want. And like, I want you to think about it like dating, right? Like, some of you might be like, this is my perfect partner. This is what it would look like, X, Y, and Z. Maybe you have an idea of that. Maybe you're like, oh, well, I'm open to trying. But like, I promise you, you have a very clear idea of what type of person you don't want to be dating, right? Thinking about it in the same, and like, that from your past experiences. And so like thinking about your work or your career in the same way, right? List of all the things that you don't want in a job or that you don't want in your next opportunity and saying, hey, here are my hard no's, right? And once you start listing out your hard no's, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to be able to have clarity when an opportunity comes of saying, okay, is this aligned with what I don't, is this aligned with what I want? And because it's not it's, oh my goodness, is this aligned with what I want? And you'll know because you'll have your list of things that you don't want, right? And something else that you can do, and I work with my girls, I'm actually moving around this, but it's like designing what your dream company looks like, or at least what the different facets are, right? For example, and I'll use Power to Fly as an example. I had never, if I'm being honest, like I'd given a chat and learn with Power to Fly about a year ago, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is actually how Nicole and I met. This is fantastic. Like for me, it was like a way to share more of the work that I was doing with my own business. And then I'd kind of forgotten about Power to Fly until they'd reached out with a new opportunity. And so what was interesting for me is like, as I was going through that process, I had my list of like, what would I like to have in my next job, or what are the things that I would value? And then as I was kind of searching or coming upon opportunities, I was able to say, oh, it's aligned with these different things that I want. It doesn't check off anything in my don't want list. Awesome. Let's keep moving forward, right? So really kind of creating that list of things that you definitely don't want in a job, as well as things that you would like. And again, it doesn't have to be like, I want to work at Nike because maybe you go to Nike and I was like, Nike's fantastic. I think we work with Nike, but like maybe you go to Nike and it's not actually aligned with what you want to be doing, right? And it's the same thing with the position that you want to be moving into. And being flexible with that do want list, but instead being able to say like, okay, well, I didn't know, again, I'm using myself as an example, but I didn't know that I would become a senior manager in global DEI strategy. But what did I do? I knew the things that were important for me. For example, creating space for women of color in the workplace, being able to provide opportunities that are aligned with Black women being able to live their best lives on their own terms anywhere in the world. And like, I had these lists of things that I cared about, didn't know how that was going to manifest. But if you have clarity on what that list is, and again, it can be broad, but being open to having that shift. And something that I talk about a lot is like your point A, your point B, and your point C. And your point A is where you are now. Your point C is like that stretch goal, that dream job, the thing that would be amazing. And the point B is like, what's a happy medium, right? And so again, when we're thinking about affirmations, and I'll transition into what we were talking about before, when we're thinking about affirmations or when we're thinking about what's possible for us, like have your point B to be able to say, okay, this is something that would feel okay, would feel good, right? And then have your point C and being able to say like, ooh, this is something that would be the most aligned. And then giving yourself grace as well. So in regard to affirmations, specifically around career. And I think that, again, like I want us to think about career not just being professional life, but also being aligned with your personal life. Because again, like if you don't have clarity on the life you want to be living, it doesn't matter what kind of job you're going to be doing. If you're miserable, you're going to be miserable, right? Like unfortunately enough. And so really like leaning into that and being able to say, like, my job shouldn't be the only thing that I'm focusing on, but making sure that my job is aligned with the type of life that I want to be living, right? And so when asking ourselves that, some affirmations that are really great, number one is like, I'm capable of finding professional opportunities that I love, right? I'm empowered, and I'm making these up on the fly, but let's go with it, right? Like, I'm empowered to be my most authentic self at work, right? And I think that that's another one that's really huge, is like being able to say, how can I show up exactly as I am? And again, if I was like, if we're thinking about this in the regards of like being a Black professional, like asking ourselves, like, I want to be able to show up and not have to code switch. Or I want to be able to talk about things that actually matter to me at work without feeling like I'm being silenced. I want to be able to create opportunity for other individuals in the workplace. And so really leaning into that and like having those affirmations saying like, I'm capable of finding professional opportunities. I'm able to be aligned and authentic in my job search. And also just like, this isn't a clear affirmation, but reminding yourself of how badass and capable you are on a daily basis. And so something that like Nicole and I have actually talked about and I think is so important is like coming up with a brag bank. And this is actually something I teach in my program as well, but like coming up with the brag bank of like, for the days that you feel like, oh, well, I don't feel like saying my affirmations, I'm having a down day. Look at that list and be able to say, oh, here's all of the impact that I've had, right? Here are the ways that I've been able to make a difference. Here's just kind of like, and again, ways that I've been able to show up for myself and others. And then you'll like channel your inner Beyonce and be like, okay, I got this. Let's keep going, you know? And so just really being intentional about that. And I'm going to stop there because I see that we've got some questions coming in.
Yeah, we've got some questions coming in, and I see a couple people commenting about one about code switching and deserving a job that allows them to bring their full self to the table. And I think so. One thing I think about a lot is professionalism, right? And authenticity in the workplace and what that means for people. And, you know, realistically, like professionalism is this idea that we have instilled in us by like the white patriarchy of what that means, right? And
Yeah.
I have the privilege to show up to work and like maybe have my hair a certain way, not be, you know, done a certain way, react to things a certain way that Black women specifically do not have the privilege to do, right? And the space to do that. And so I'd love for you to dive in a little bit more there about how, when you're making this job switch and looking for your next place, how can you determine what are red flags for places that aren't going to allow you to bring your full self and places that might require you to code switch?
I love this, Nicole. Fantastic point. Again, I was like, if there is an ally award, I would give it to you in a heartbeat. But I was going to say something that I think is just as important is like, when you go into interviews, you are not just being interviewed, but you are interviewing the company that you're working or that you are trying to work for, right? And I want us to remember that when we're thinking about the fact that like we have power because we know that we're going to bring something to the workplace, that we're going to be able to make change, that we're going to be able to be innovative, impactful, etc. But a lot of the times you say, oh, but like they didn't choose me or they didn't want me. And it's like, no, that's not it. Like it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So thinking about it long term, you don't want to get chosen and then find out that like, ooh, this is a toxic workplace or like I'm being hired for X, Y, and Z. And so something that I would say is when you're going through the interview process, right? When you're going through the interview process, like also ask intentional questions. And this is something that I think is really like, whether it's asking them like, what are their current initiatives around being or around creating an inclusive workplace, right? What are their initiatives around being able to empower underrepresented talent in the workplace? Asking them what their demographics look like. And I would also even recommend like getting in contact, and this is something that I think is so important, get in contact with other individuals who already work at that company, okay? So like if you, for example, let's say that you're applying to work at Power to Fly and you wanna know what the experience is like as a Black employee at Power to Fly, do your research on LinkedIn, see who works there, and have a conversational interview with them because you know that like there'll be a realness there of being able to say, okay, girl, like this is what it's really like, and you'll be able to understand and like also do your due diligence before joining a company to be able to say, what will my experience look like and how can I get a real example? And so I think this is so important when thinking about the red flags of number one, again, like if companies are doing the work, they'll be doing the work and like they'll know how to actually answer those questions. And I see this all the time with the companies that I work with and consult for and create strategy for at Power to Fly, you know that they're intentional because like they have one pagers of like, here are all of our initiatives, here's what we've done, and here's what we're doing. They're prepared because they're actually ready to show up instead of being like, well, we're trying to hire more individuals of color. Like, that's not it. You're not a token hire, and you don't need to think or believe that you're a token hire. You're someone who happens to be dope talent, who just so happens to be a woman of color or a Black woman or from whatever community that you're in, right? So again, also not like shrinking ourselves to what we think people want or like kind of valuing our worth based off of that, but instead saying, hold on, I know that my career and the fact that I'm going to be spending 8 hours a day at a job means that I want to be able to show up as my most authentic self and go from there. And yeah, I think that's it. I feel like that was a little rampage, but I think it's something that's really important. So that was a great question, Nicole.
I love everything that you said, but I loved most importantly how you said, like, we're also interviewing these companies, you know, like it's not a gift for them to want to employ us. Like we're also a gift to them, right? Like we have the bottom line. And you know, I mean, I know this is a conversation for Black professionals, so I'm saying we, and it's not very fair to generalize because there's a lot of different things, you know, from privilege standpoint and everything. But realistically, like, there's so many things that we as individuals bring to the table that we have to remember when we go into that process. And that's why I think that brag book is so important that you're talking about, Sienna. You know, bring those receipts, which I know you've talked about before, and I'll drop the link from the previous conversation that we did in the chat so everyone can check that out. But it is so important. Anytime you get an email, anytime you get a Slack message, whatever messenger you use between colleagues, you know, screenshot those. When Sienna said Nicole's #1 ally, you better believe I already screenshot that, and I'm waiting until this is over so I can put it in part of my brag book. And so those things are so important because also on those really hard days when you're feeling like, what am I doing? What value do I bring? It's so helpful to go back to that. And so thank you for talking about all of that, Sienna. And I wanted to dive into a question that got a couple of votes in the Q&A section. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them there or +1 in the chat, and I can promote you so that you can come off of mute and ask your question live. But we had a question come in that says, I'm a Black woman who works in the RJ and DEI space. I want to shift to doing people, culture /HR /employee relations. However, I am getting to the final interviews and not being selected. The advice I'm given is that I'm a great candidate and there is no negative feedback. This is killing my self-esteem. I do not know how to take this niche and move forward.
This is fantastic. So I want to be able to make sure that I'm fully answering your question, Julia. So is the niche, I never know if it's like niche or niche, anyway, it's fine. Is the niche that you want to take and move forward, are you talking about the RJ and DEI space, or are you talking about the people, culture, HR, and employee relations? And so I'll talk about this from kind of a general standpoint from what I'm hearing. And number one, like, girl, don't worry. The fact that you're getting into final interviews means that you have it. It just means that maybe those companies aren't the right fit for you. Again, thinking about it in that way of saying, like, it's not that they're not choosing you. Well, I don't want you to feel like it's not that they're not choosing you, but it's just it's not the right time and not the right place, right? And in regards to RJ and DEI, also, can you specify for me what RJ is, just so that I make sure that we're on the same page? But something that I talk about a lot when thinking about DEI and how a lot of people view DEI, it's restorative justice. Okay, dope. So when thinking about things like DEI or restorative justice, et cetera, it's something that's kind of like put off to the side as like, oh, that's a DEI thing. So companies say, we don't have budget for that, or we don't need that, or we're doing fine, et cetera. But the way that I personally talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion is the fact that, like, how are we creating workspaces, companies, communities that are inclusive for all individuals? What does that mean? It's not just about race or ethnicity. It's not just about gender. It's not just about if your sexuality, right? What it's really about is being able to make sure that everyone has a space where they can feel seen, heard, and celebrated. Okay? Now, you take that and you think about people, culture, HR, and employee relations. It's the same, but different, right? The only difference is like what we're calling it. Because if you think about it again, like DEI, switching the narrative around that. And something I talk about a lot with our clients is like, DEI should be a part of the company's DNA. It shouldn't be this thing over to the side, but it's literally being able to say, like, how do we make sure that not only everyone has a seat at the table, but that there's food everybody can eat, right? And not only that, but like people feel like they want to be in conversation with someone else who's around them. And so when we think about people culture and HR, it's essentially being able to say, how do we make sure that we're having the things in place so that all of the people who work at our company feel like they have equal opportunity and feel like they have a place to kind of shine and show up authentically. And so hopefully, Julia, that might have helped a little bit in some of the ways that you're positioning your past experience. And again, something else that I would do, and I was like, if you're one of my students and you want to like kind of +1 the ISSI methodology, please do. And like, this is something I talk about in maybe almost all of my chat and learns. The ISSI is honing in on your identity, your strengths, your skills, and your impact. And like focusing less on the niche and what you were working in before, and more so taking all of the things that you've done and that you've learned through that experience and positioning it for where you want to be going, right? So again, yes, that might be a niche, but really being able to say, hold on, maybe we don't necessarily need to be talking about it as restorative justice and DEI, but instead being able to say, hey, in the past X amount of years, here's all the impact that I've had for the companies that I've worked for. Here's the changes that they've seen. Here's how they've kind of been able to level up, and positioning from there instead of focusing on a title, right? Because again, technically, like, I was like, y'all, if you only knew, I've worked in fashion PR and like high-end travel and sustainable branding and the remote work like I've literally done everything. But what happens is when it comes time to apply for a new job opportunity, I'm not saying, hey, here are all the different fields that I've worked in. Instead, I'm saying, hey, no matter where I've worked, here's the impact that I've had while I was there. And here's how I want to be able to take my identity, strengths, skills, and impact and position that to the company that y'all have so that I can create the same, if not better, for all of you. And yeah, that's it. So hopefully that helped. Hopefully that helped. Of course, Julia.
I love this.
Happy to help.
Such a good point. Making your impact as general as possible, right? And as transferable as possible. And I think when we also talk about transferable skills, you know, we have to also talk about taking career breaks and those things that we've learned during that time and what we can do to make our next career move easier, right? Or more seamless. And so we had somebody who wrote in the chat that said, after a break of a few years, I'm going to restart my career back again in the IT sector, and they're hoping for some good opportunities. And I know we had a pre-submitted question about that, about making the switch after 2 years or going back to the workforce. And I wanted to see if you had any specific advice about that, Sienna.
Yeah, I love that. I would say focus and hone in on what you learned during that 2-year time off, right? And I really think about this in the fact that, again, we think about personal and professional and we have them so separated. But I'm sure, I was like, you've learned, you've grown, you've evolved in those past 2 years. So like really leaning into that and not focusing so much on like the gap that you might have. Because a lot of the times, if you know how to position yourself, a company doesn't care. It's the same thing as like when you're right out of college and you take a gap year. When you apply for college, you're not like, if you say, oh, I took a gap year and I was just like gallivanting in Spain doing whatever, maybe that's not the best way. But instead, imagine positioning it like this. Well, in the past 2 years, and I'm going to use Spain as an example, I've been able to spend time learning about cross-cultural communication in a different country. I've been able to adapt to new experiences and learn how to, I don't know, X, Y, and Z, right? But really thinking about it as like, what is the benefit? And really being able to look at those gaps in times and being able to talk about that and move forward. Again, depending on what those gaps were for. Maybe it's because you needed a break. Maybe it's because you recently became a new parent. Maybe it's because whatever the reason is, really leaning into that. And then also realizing like, did you pick up a new hobby when you were in that 2-year break? Did you start a side hustle? Did you do whatever? And using those things to position yourself for that new company. Again, I'll be honest with y'all. Almost every job that I've gotten, I've been able to position the work that I do with my company outside of work as like impact that has gotten me my foot in the door. Same deal with Power to Fly. They found me through Power to Fly with the work that I was doing with Las Morenas de España, which is now turned into Master Your Move Abroad. My job before that, when I was working in the co-living space, I was able to use the things that I had done in my free time to be able to position myself and say, hey, this is what I was doing, while technically I've been in Spain for 7 years. My first 3 years, my first 3 years, I was teaching English. But while I was teaching English, like, that's not even on my CV or resume. If you like don't know me personally, you probably wouldn't know that I was teaching English, because like that's not the story that I had for myself. Instead, it was like, hey, I've been here and here are all of the other things that I've been doing in the meantime, and using that to really position yourself. And again, bringing your identity and experience into it and realizing that that should hopefully help
I
you out.
love this. Getting a lot of undertones of preparation, right? Especially when you talk about the ABC method. So like the C being the stretch, the B being like, okay, we can go there, it seems more realistic, and then the A being where you are. And, you know, I think there's probably a lot of people right now who are thinking about making the change. I mean, typically at the beginning of the year, that's always when you see a lot of like turnover. People, you know, over the past year have come to realizations or not. And so in preparation for making those possible career moves, you know, maybe if it's not next week, maybe if it's 6 months down the line, how do you recommend growing your network in that time to really, you know, when you get to that point where you're saying, okay, I'm ready, you're all set up for success?
Yeah, I love this question. And I say that because I don't like using the word network, although it is technically a network, but instead I want to say, how can we build long-term connections? And I think that this is the most important thing, because again, I was like, I feel like I sound like a unicorn. I swear I'm like a normal person, y'all, but like, I want to share this with you so that you can start implementing these things. Where I've never had to properly apply for a job because of the long-term connections that I've had. That doesn't mean I wasn't qualified. I was doing the work, but skipping the going to job post, doing X, Y, and Z, because you have these long-term connections. And so automatically, like, Myleik Teal, she's the founder of Curlbox. She's also just like dope. She's dope. Check her out if you can. But Myleik, she always says like, stay ready so you don't have to get ready, right? And she also says like, your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So what happens as you're building long-term connections? When there are job opportunities, when there are things, people will think about you automatically. And like, that's something that I know I do, right? So like asking yourself, and then I'll get back to answering the original question, but asking yourself, like, how can you start building connections, not with like, hey, I'm reaching out to you because I want a job now, but instead being able to say like, hey, I'm genuinely interested in like who you are, what you're doing, and I'd love to hear more about your experience. Or I just love to connect and also provide value for the other person. And I want to say this because I'll tell y'all what not to do, right? Sending someone a DM or sending someone a LinkedIn message being like, hey, X, Y, and Z with like what you want, and that's it. Because I promise you on the other end, they'll be like, number one, who are you? Number two, hello, nice to meet you. And number three, it's like, why should I take out time, effort, and energy in my day to talk to someone who I don't really know, you know? And so like, I'm being very honest today, but I'm saying this because it's happened to me so often, versus being able to say like, let's connect, or let me engage with you a little bit before giving a direct ask. But really like building long-term connections by saying, okay, who are people that I'd like to learn from, that I admire, that might be in the fields or companies that I would like to be working with, and like reaching out to them and building those connections. And then once you do that, again, do that, and then also be authentically yourself and know how to communicate with clarity and confidence. But when you do that, then it comes like, hey, Lauren saying to me, again, I gave one chat and learn with Power to Fly. And Lauren was like, hey, there's this open position. Let me connect you directly to Milena, who's one of the co-founders. And it was like skipping 17 parts of the process, but not because I sent out being like, hey, I'm looking for a job X, Y, and Z, but my personal brand was enough to be able to say, hey, this is someone who I think of automatically. Same thing for myself. Like when there are people who, number one, don't do it in a performative way, right? Of not like, hey, X, Y, and Z because they want something from you, but genuinely build relationships. Then when it comes time to like, oh, we need X kind of person, whether it's, I don't know, no matter what it is for whatever opportunity, I have people that I automatically think of who have invested in those relationships. And the last thing that I'm going to say when it comes to building long-term connections is like, don't have it be a one and done, you know, because like that's not cute. No one likes having someone approach you, say something, drop off the face of the earth, and then come back when you need something again. But instead, like a great book, I don't remember the name of it. No, okay, so there's a great book called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. And that book is a fantastic book on building long-term relationships, on networking intentionally, etc. And I've personally loved a ton of that. Oh my goodness, I have learned a ton from that book and I really love it. And it really just lets you sit with like, how do I make sure that on a quarterly basis, I'm cultivating those relationships, right? How do I make sure that I have a list of people that I want to be reaching out to, learning from, connecting with, collaborating with, right? And really think about it also, not always like, how can I be networking with CEOs of companies? If you want to, dope, that's fine. But Issa Rae always talks about like, how can we network across? Like, how can we network with people who are across or maybe like a little bit diagonally, but not trying to like have a huge jump and then feel bad when you get rejected, but instead say, how can I really build these relationships? And then you never know who someone knows. Like you're always, I'm sure, like 2 or 3 steps away of a connection that can really set you up for the rest of your life. And so really just cultivating those connections and not being transactional about it.
Such good advice. Thanks for that book. I think it's so important, you know, not only when we're thinking about building our careers and trying to get a job, but yeah, making those intentional connections because, you know, honestly, that's like some of my favorite parts of working, like Friday, setting aside time, like, you know, maybe an hour and a half to get to talk to different people who just throwing ideas out and connecting, you know, maybe that can help ignite ideas in your career and like things that you can bring to the work that you're doing. And so I think that's so valuable that you talk about that, Sienna. I got a private message asking about the ISSI that you talked about, and they wanted to know a little bit more about
that. Absolutely. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Okay. So Michelle, if you just asked, I just dropped the name of the book in the chat and a link to Amazon. So I was like, I should work with Amazon because I feel like I'm always giving book recommendations, but that's the link to the book if you have it there. And okay, so ISSI stands for Identity, Strengths, Skills, and Impact. So I'm going to walk you through it really quickly. Identity is essentially being able to say like, who are you as a person, right? Like, who are you as an individual, and what are the things or the parts of your story or the parts of who you are that no one can change? And I'll use this and I'll paint this picture for myself and with the work that I have now, because sometimes storytelling is better than just giving details, okay? So identity. Part of my identity is the fact that, obviously, I'm a Black woman. I was raised in a single parent home. It wasn't Truck City. My family did the best that we could, but like I know what it's like to start from the bottom and then work your way up. And also in addition to that, I know what it's like to live in the Black community and not necessarily feel accepted. And I also know what it's like to live in the white community. I'm from Brooklyn, but we grew up in an all-white town of like 5,000 people. We were the only Black family for most of my middle school and high school. So like I knew what it was like to never really feel like you fit in or belong. And then as the years went through, I kind of found my tribe of like, oh, there are other Black women out there like me, right? So anyway, that part of my identity of being able to kind of be a chameleon, being able to know how to navigate and do things in different spaces that I didn't necessarily grow up with, that's actually something that a lot of people wouldn't talk about. But the fact that I talk about that openly means like, oh, that's actually something that's really useful, right? When thinking about the work that I do at DEI, it's being able to say, how can, no matter where we are, create a safe space for all people to feel like themselves? Why is that so important to me? Because like I know what it feels like to not have been able to feel like I had a safe space in certain rooms. So again, bringing that identity into your workplace, bringing that identity into who you are will help you position yourself. Another quick example, I've been living in Spain for the past 7 years. When I talk about this professionally, it's not just saying, hey, I live in Spain and life is great. Obviously it is, but it's also saying like, hey, what have I learned since living here? Going back to cross-cultural communication, right? Positioning my past identity to be able to say, this is actually something that's huge. The fact that I, as an American, has been living in Spain and I've had to learn how to navigate language, cultural differences, politics, adapting. Nicole's also an expat, so she totally gets it. And like learning how to navigate these different things in different spaces and not just having it be like, I've been living my best life, but instead being able to say, hold on, I've actually been learning something, and a part of my identity has been able to help me. Okay, let's move forward. Strengths. Strengths are things that are like your God-given talents, your natural things that you might not necessarily think as strengths. Another example, I'm hella sensitive. I was like, I've always been a sensitive person. I'm like the black sheep in my family where I'm always crying and feeling too much about everything. And they're just like, what's going on? Okay. So part of that like I used to see as a weakness is actually a strength. Why? Because I care. So I go the extra mile, right? It means that I'm able to be more compassionate towards other individuals. So I'm able to kind of like lean into that. What does that also mean? One of my strengths is that I'm a great listener. And I'm a great listener and I ask deep questions. These are things that sometimes my friends laugh at me because they'll be like, how was your day? And I'm like, what's been like, describe how you're feeling in one word so we can talk about it, right? And so like, these are things where there are things that come naturally to me, but I do a lot of work with consulting, and that means doing intentional active listening and learning how to bridge the gap. So these things that are a part of like my natural everyday life that you might not necessarily consider a strength, you better believe that like when you're positioning it for this, like, okay, well, I have to do consulting and strategy. A lot of my job is listening to these deep conversations, asking deep questions, the right questions, and then creating a strategy around it. Okay. Skills. This is like the most typical skills, right? So like, what are things that you're good at? I was like, sorry, I was gonna be like a lot of things, but what are things that you're good at? That could be something as like big picture thinking. What are things that you've learned? Do you know how to do design? Do you work in the tech world? Like what are actual skills that you would normally think of on what you put on your resume or CV? But then we're gonna take it one step further. And when thinking about skills, thinking about rush skills. So if you are taking notes, write this down. Rush skills are remote skills, unique skills, soft skills and hard skills, right? So remote skills. So thinking, are you really organized? Are you a good communicator? You might not necessarily think that has to do with your work, but like we're all working remotely right now. The majority of us are. So being able to say, if you're really organized or you're a good communicator, that means that if I'm sending you a Slack message, I'm going to be able to clearly understand you, or I'm going to know how to work asynchronously, X, Y, and Z. Okay. And then impact, we'll go back to that and then we'll wrap it up. But with impact, again, it's that brag bank. It's that being able to say, how have I been able to change other individuals' lives, right? Or other companies' lives. And I want you to think about impact in a different way again, right? Something that I love and is one of like my favorite impact moments of the work that I've been doing at Power to Fly is like, for me, what makes me really happy is seeing that like we now have more Black women on our team since I've joined. The numbers skyrocketed. And I was like, maybe that's not direct impact, but I was like, I'm going to pat myself on the back and say that like it had something to do with it of like having the importance of representation, being able to see these different things. Impact can be something as much as like, I've been able to X, Y, and Z and like write down the actual things that you've done, grow something by X amount, whatever that is. And again, remember that that can be quantifiable or qualifiable, right? I was like, I don't know if you can make those into words. Like, can either be, anyway, it's fine. But thinking about it in that way of like, what is the impact that you've been able to have? And then also saying impact outside of work as well, right? And so not just in your past career, but if you are doing things like you have a blog, you run a book club, you run organizations at your church, whatever it is, realize that like you have impact outside of just the workplace and then position yourself for that as well. And thank you, Nicole, for sharing the rush skills in the chat. So yeah.
Thank you.
That's the
No, thank you so much for sharing that. And I always love like tangible examples. And so I'm sure everyone on the line appreciated that because it's so much easier when you can hear somebody say, okay, so this is what you've done. This is how you can apply XYZ things. So thank you. And so we got a question in the Q&A and I would love to dive into this. I know we've only got 9 minutes left here, but this is a really big topic, especially after all of the social injustices happening in the US, which is nothing new, but there's tons of media attention on it. And this idea of globalization has really provided the opportunity for tons of people to move abroad, and especially Black individuals to move abroad, to feel, it's obviously different. I can't talk to that experience, but I'm about to hand it over to you so you can. So I would love for you to talk about your kind of experience there, what it's been like for you living abroad. I mean, I know that's a very long topic to talk about. Sorry that I left this for the end.
Do we have another hour?
But beyond that, I would love, Jenny asked a question about how would I get my resume translated to another language for submission for a broad move? And I know that this is something you work with. So would love to hand the mic over to you to talk about these two things.
That's fantastic. Okay, so 2 questions that I would ask you. Again, deep questions, but we're here to help you like lean in a little bit more. Number 1 is like, are you getting the resume translated? Okay, so I'm thinking about 2 things, right? Number 1, I would say reach out to someone who does resume translations. There's tons of individuals out there who do that specifically. I'm also going to have you, hold on, I'm looking it up right now, but I was going to say join our online community, because I'm sure that there's some Black woman who's in that community who does resume translations. But I would also ask you, like, is this for a general resume, or is this because you're applying for a job specifically? And I say this to say, if you need to have your resume translated, will they embrace or embody someone who's a native English speaker, right? Something else that I want you to ask yourself is like, when you're thinking about, again, 2 things. 1, reach out to your network, because sometimes your network might have more access than what you think, or reach out to Facebook groups of individuals that are getting ready to, or that are already living abroad, because odds are they have someone in their network. I just dropped our Facebook group in the chat, so like definitely check that out. But something that I would also say is like asking yourself, has someone asked you to have your resume translated in another language, or have you made an assumption that you need to have your resume translated in another language? Because a lot of the times, if you're trying to work in a different country for a move abroad, you're a native English speaker. So like going back to identity, that can actually be something that's a plus. But I want to promise you that like if you're applying for jobs, if you need to translate your resume, then like you need to think about where you're applying to, because then you have to ask yourself, like, there's going to be blocks of, well, I need to be fluent in this language, or I don't speak X language well enough. And then you're going to start like blocking yourself from different opportunities because there's an assumption that this is what has to happen. So again, I don't know your situation, but I want you to lean in, and anyone else who's thinking about moving abroad, but like leaning into these questions and asking yourself, like, something I say is like, is this based on facts or fears? Are you fearing that you need to have your resume translated to a different language in order to get a job? Or have you already spoken to someone and that's a fact? And like, you know that you need to happen for this company. Take it one more step further and ask yourself, number 1, will you feel comfortable there in navigating this in a different language? Number 2, if you need to be able to get it done, head to online Facebook groups and ask there if people know other people, get resources. That's also a great way for you to start building long-term connections. And then number 3, use the fact that you're a native English speaker as a plus. And so I say this a lot because having lived in Spain for the past 7 years and having been a native English speaker, one of the huge benefits is, again, it's not in quotation marks, but like cross-cultural communication of being able to say, people want native English speakers. So if you're a native English speaker and you're putting your resume in, or CV, depending on where you're based, it's the same thing, but like in the other language, how will they know that you're a native English speaker so that you can use that to your advantage, right? So a lot of things to think about, but quick solution is head to different Facebook groups, ask around there instead of trying to do it yourself, but then go a little bit deeper and then ask yourself, if it's for a specific job that needs to be translated, will you be able to thrive there if you don't feel comfortable enough with the language? So hopefully that helps.
I also want you to talk a little bit about your personal experience having moved abroad, found a job, because I think, there's probably a lot of people. I don't think I would have taken the plunge to move abroad had it not been for love. And so here I am after, having made that move for love. Look, there's my love behind me. But
I know,
right? It wasn't planned, I promise. But it's opened the doors for a lot, and I'm surprised by how little I knew prior to moving abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to the professional and personal, I think this is going to be a great way for us to kind of like end the conversation, because I know that we have 4 minutes left, so I'll try to be short. But in regards to moving abroad and also finding work that you love abroad, it goes back to these 2 things, right? Like, yes, professional is important, but what's more important is about like thinking about the lifestyle that you want, right? And so when I originally moved abroad, I was like, cool, my professional growth is going to take a back seat for a little bit because I need to focus on healing, on the life that I want to create there, on doing the work, etc. Right? And so I said, okay, well, that's going to be on the back burner until I'm stable enough abroad to be able to have clarity on what I want. Right? And so as I did that, something that was always really interesting to me, again, bring back the fact that I happen to be a Black woman and living abroad as a, like, I think living abroad as a Black woman is very empowering, if I'm being completely honest, and I'm way happier here than I would be in the US. But I had a lot of naysayers being like, you'll never be able to stay abroad long term unless you marry someone. You'll never be able to do something outside of teaching English. You'll never. And maybe I was a little bit too confident being like, oh, watch me, right? And so something I was really intentional about was like, I now have the life, or at least I've started creating the life that I really want to. How do I make sure that I'm intentionally setting myself up for new opportunities? And that came from building long-term connections. That came from not talking myself out of stuff when I was ready to. Like, I had been living abroad for 2 years, and as I was doing the work that I was doing with my business, like, I gave a TEDx talk. I was speaking at international conference. I was doing all of these things that, like, I would have never imagined when I was living back in the US. But it's something I call like the big fish, little sea theory of like, you being a Black woman living abroad actually gives you so much of an up because it's something that's so different, where it's like, it's like you have this special magic about you where it's like, this is amazing. So you have access to more opportunities if you position yourself in the right way, etc. But really just honing in on the fact that, like, number one, and I know we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to stop it here. Number one, it absolutely is possible. Number two, I want you to remember that, like, our minds are our best friend or worst enemy, right? And so really just like leaning in and believing that it is possible and surrounding yourself with other individuals who are doing the same. And then number three is also like that point in saying, like, you want to design your dream life, both personally, professionally, and all of your different life accounts, but like figure out what the first next best step is and focus on that first. So have that dream and goal in the future. Have that vision for your future, but then also say, okay, what's the right next step? And then start actively working towards that and realize that it definitely is possible. And yeah, when you're ready, I was like, I can't wait to share more with you all. But I do know that we're at 1 minute left. So I want to say thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. Nicole, I'm half taking your job, but I'm going to pass it over to you. But I want to say thank you to everyone who has been tuning in. I loved hearing your questions and answering them. And also just like, if y'all have any other questions, definitely feel free to reach out and don't hesitate. And Nicole, I'm passing it over to you.
Sienna, I mean, I would like gladly let you take us away here, but yes, I want to thank you for being here, giving us all of this insight. And I've dropped your previous chat, and Sienna's done other conversations as well. But it's just really great to have you here, providing information, providing visibility and insights for us. And somebody just said that I appreciate the first next step insight because it makes everything else seem less overwhelming, which is very true. But I really want to thank you. And just quickly, because I know we're at time, but where can people follow up with you?
Yeah, I love that. I just dropped my Instagram in the chat, but definitely feel free to reach out. On Instagram. Also, for those of you who are interested, I'm also dropping Mastery Move Abroad, which is my company where I teach women how to find the clarity, career, and community they need to build a life abroad. And feel free to just reach out on LinkedIn, wherever, but I would love to connect more. And I just want to say thank you again for all of y'all, and hopefully we see you in a chat and learn in the future.
Yes. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for spending your Monday with us, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest. So bye-bye.
Bye, y'all.